I knew that I was eating continuously, endlessly, obsessively, because I was trying to feel whole. So the title of this chapter is It in This Bag of Chips? And the it is our wholeness. The it is our fulfillment. The it is our sense of worthiness. That feeling of I'm enough, I'm safe, I'm secure. Oftentimes we accidentally look for that wholeness or that sense of safety or security and comfort in food. We have to eat, right? So this one is hard. You can't just cut it off and go cold turkey. And that actually is a whole nother flip side to this unhealthy relationship to food that oftentimes I found myself in too, which was instead of binging on food, instead of trying to fill up on food, I would actually restrict myself from food so that I could feel whole and complete, so that I could feel small and skinny and pretty and proud of myself, I guess you could say. So it doesn't really matter which direction you go, and I have a feeling because you're human, you might kind of bounce back and forth between the two. Like, oftentimes the diet culture is what encourages that, right? It's like you go on a diet, you restrict yourself, and then on the other side of that, you feel deprived, and then you binge on food. I was 21 years old, and I was in my basement bedroom at my sister's house, and I was so desperate for a solution. I was just Googling like food addict, food addiction. Like, I didn't know what was going on, but food was all I thought about. And it had there were two aspects, two reasons why food was all I thought about. One, I was eating very addictive foods, right? So what I was eating was causing me to be addicted and obsessed and never fulfilled, never nourished. But the other thing was, the reason I was reaching for food was because I had this void within me, this wound within me, this feeling of I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, therefore I need to reach for something to constantly fill me up. Whether it's food that you struggle with, social media, cleaning. A lot of you say that when you're avoiding feelings, you like just tidy up the house or vacuum or something. Whatever it is that you do to numb your feelings, avoid conflict, avoid discomfort, or try to fill yourself up, try to gather things to like feel good, the place you have to start is awareness. You have to first realize what you're doing, right? Because you can't change anything that you're not consciously aware of. I want to ask you, if you're watching this now, just let me know, like, in a few words, like, what is your relationship to eating? What has your relationship to food been like? And if you would rather not share, do you have any questions for me particularly on maybe how I started to shift my relationship to food? All of these things that I write about in the book are our attempt to self-soothe. And the reason I started with the core wound is because that's what you're trying to soothe. And although it might not seem related that in your childhood you were neglected or abused and now you're eating because of it, those two things might seem entirely separate, yet they're not. They're very intricately connected, because when you reach for these things, whether it is drugs, alcohol, shopping, makeup, gossip, or food, you're reaching so that you can try to fill that hole, or so that you don't have to feel what you're feeling. And the important thing to ask yourself is it working? Are you successful in your attempts to numb and soothe? Because I can tell you one thing, when I was numbing and self-soothing in all of these unhealthy, destructive ways, I succeeded for 10 years. And when I say succeed, I'm using quotes, because I didn't have to necessarily sit in my feelings. I just kept jumping from the next thing to the next thing to the next thing. But underneath it all, it was all still there. And my subconscious knew it. And the hardest thing, the most detrimental thing that happens over the course of that time, over the course of the time that you're running from your feelings using, let's just say in this example, food, your subconscious knows it, and you are gradually losing respect for yourself. You are chipping away at your self-esteem and your self-worth, which unfortunately is the core of the problem in the first place, right? So accidentally, you are actually making the problem that you're trying to solve even worse. You're taking these feelings you don't want to feel and you're just piling it on, adding to your emotional debt so that you don't have to feel it today necessarily, because I'm going to turn on the TV, or I'm going to open up a bag of chips, or I'm going to go to Culver's and get a Butterburger meal or whatever. Whatever you do, maybe some ice cream. Or even for me, like, I think this is important to point out, I used to binge on healthy food. So I would get things I thought were healthy and I always felt deprived. I would get things like Wheat Thins, or I would get like skinny bagels, or like wheat bread, or all this nonsense, low-fat stuff that I thought was healthy, yet I would just eat tons of it because I was never full, never satisfied, and I was still running from my feelings. I was still running from myself. So I think it's really important for you to ask yourself, is your attempt to avoid or numb your feelings, is it working? Because as I just mentioned, so mine worked for a short period of time, meaning I was constantly running for 10 plus years, but it was all leading me inevitably to a breaking point. Because underneath it all, I knew I was not facing the truth. I knew I was not facing myself. I knew that I was eating continuously, endlessly, obsessively, because I was trying to feel whole. And it wasn't until I decided to actually face myself, look in the mirror, which I talk about later on in the book, and say certain things to myself and feel certain uncomfortable feelings, that I could then start to have the courage to not reach into the bag of chips or reach into the cupboard for the cookies or for the cereal or for the bagels or for the bread or for the whatever it is. I could pause in between that decision and say, am I hungry, or am I trying to avoid myself? Am I trying to run from myself? What do I think I'm going to achieve when I reach into that bag of chips? And oftentimes it's temporary relief, it's temporary fulfillment, it's temporary satisfaction that doesn't last. And oftentimes it actually leads to more guilt, more shame, more regret, less self-worth, less self-esteem, less self-respect, and less self-love. It's all an accident, and it's perpetual, and it's coming from that scared place of your inner child, feeling unsafe, feeling insecure, feeling unloved, feeling unworthy. And like I said, I know it might seem disconnected, like that you're not eating, you're not binging or mindlessly eating because of your inner child, but I would highly recommend just having awareness around and curiosity around that it might actually be very connected.